Settle into the sleepy mind channel, where tonight we will discover how one of humanity's most extraordinary inventions begins with one of the most ordinary materials on Earth. Every masterpiece of stained glass, from the towering rose windows of medieval cathedrals to the delicate lamps that glow warmly inside homes, begins with something so common that most of us walk across it without giving it a second thought. Sand. Tiny grains of silica scattered across beaches, deserts, riverbanks, and the ocean floor. At first glance, there's nothing remarkable about it. It slips through our fingers, gathers in the wind, and has covered parts of our planet for millions of years. Yet hidden inside those tiny grains is the possibility of something extraordinary. With enough heat to melt stone, carefully measured minerals, remarkable patience, and centuries of accumulated knowledge, ordinary sand can be transformed into glowing sheets of glass that have inspired kings, artists, architects, scientists, and millions of visitors for well over 1,000 years. Few discoveries have done so much to unite science, chemistry, engineering, craftsmanship, architecture, and art into a single creation. Even today, despite lasers, computers, and modern technology, the sight of sunlight shining through a magnificent stained glass window still leaves people standing quietly in admiration, wondering how something so simple could become something so breathtaking. Perhaps even more remarkable is that stained glass is unlike almost every other form of art. A painting remains the same every time you look at it. A marble sculpture never changes its appearance from one hour to the next. But stained glass is never truly finished until sunlight passes through it. Morning light creates colors that disappear by afternoon. Clouds soften brilliant blues and glowing reds before allowing them to burst back into life only moments later. As the sun slowly moves across the sky, rivers of color drift across ancient stone floors and towering columns, creating a masterpiece that is never quite the same twice. Every sunrise, every passing cloud, every season, and every change in the weather transforms the artwork in subtle ways. It is one of the very few art forms where light itself becomes the final artist, completing a masterpiece that has patiently waited, sometimes for centuries, for the next dawn. If you enjoy videos like these, feel free to like and subscribe. For all-night listening, be sure to check out the playlist, where you'll find many more relaxing journeys through history, science, nature, and the remarkable stories hidden inside everyday things. And perhaps the greatest mystery of all is not how beautiful stained glass became, but how anyone first discovered it. Who looked at ordinary sand and imagined that it could be transformed into something almost jewel-like? How did ancient craftsmen learn that heating silica to temperatures above 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit could create molten glass that flowed like thick honey? Who first discovered that a tiny amount of cobalt could produce a blue deeper than the evening sky, that copper could create brilliant greens, or that one of the world's most precious metals, gold, could somehow produce glowing ruby red instead of gold? These discoveries were not made overnight. They were the result of centuries of curiosity, experimentation, careful observation, occasional accidents, and patient craftsmanship that slowly revealed one of history's most remarkable transformations. Some of these discoveries became so valuable that master glassmakers guarded their techniques as closely as royal treasures, passing their knowledge from one trusted apprentice to the next, while keeping many of their methods hidden from competing workshops. That remarkable discovery changed far more than art. It changed architecture, religion, science, and eventually the modern world itself. Long before stained glass illuminated Europe's great Gothic cathedrals, ancient civilizations were experimenting with glass thousands of years earlier, slowly uncovering secrets that would take generations to perfect. Every new discovery built upon the last, allowing craftsmen to create larger sheets of glass, richer colors, stronger windows, and increasingly breathtaking designs. Along the way, they unknowingly explored chemistry, physics, and engineering centuries before those subjects had formal names. Their workshops became places where fire, minerals, mathematics, and artistic imagination quietly worked together. Tonight, we will follow that extraordinary journey from quiet grains of sand to roaring furnaces, from glowing rivers of molten glass to the careful hands of master artisans patiently assembling thousands of colorful pieces into breathtaking works of art. We will discover how nature provided the raw materials, how ancient civilizations unlocked the first secrets of glassmaking, how medieval workshops transformed cathedrals into breathtaking galleries of light, and how modern conservators continue preserving these priceless masterpieces for future generations. So make yourself comfortable, allow your breathing to slow, and let your mind drift into a world where fire transforms sand into glass, ordinary minerals become brilliant color, and sunlight brings centuries of craftsmanship wonderfully to life. To understand the story of stained glass, we must begin long before the first cathedral rose above a European city, before master craftsmen carefully assembled colorful windows, and even before anyone truly understood what glass was. The story reaches back thousands of years to a time when humanity was still discovering the remarkable properties hidden within the natural world. Like many great inventions, glass was probably not created by a single person on a single day. Instead, it emerged gradually through centuries of observation, experimentation, and a willingness to ask an important question. What happens when fire becomes hotter than anyone has ever seen before? Long before people intentionally manufactured glass, nature had already demonstrated how it could be created. One of the earliest forms of natural glass is known as obsidian, a beautiful volcanic rock formed when molten lava cools so rapidly that crystals never have time to develop. Instead of becoming ordinary stone, the lava hardens into a smooth, glossy material with razor-sharp edges. Ancient people quickly recognized its usefulness. Obsidian could be shaped into knives, spear points, arrowheads, and cutting tools that were often sharper than early metal blades. Archaeologists have discovered obsidian tools dating back thousands of years, showing that humans appreciated the unique qualities of natural glass long before they learned how to create it themselves. Lightning offered another remarkable demonstration of nature's ability to transform sand into glass. When an exceptionally powerful bolt strikes a sandy surface, temperatures can briefly soar to well above 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, far hotter than the surface of the sun. For only a fraction of a second, the intense heat melts the silica beneath the ground before it cools almost instantly. The result is a fragile glass tube called a fulgurite, sometimes known as petrified lightning. These strange formations twist beneath the surface like delicate roots, preserving the exact path taken by the electrical discharge. Although ancient people may not have understood how fulgurites formed, discovering these mysterious glass structures would have shown that under extraordinary conditions, ordinary sand could become something completely different. Meteorite impacts created yet another form of natural glass. When enormous space rocks collided with Earth millions of years ago, the tremendous energy released by the impact instantly melted surrounding rocks and sand. As this molten material cooled, it formed glassy substances known as impact glass or tektites. These unusual objects have been discovered on several continents and vary greatly in size, color, and shape, depending upon the conditions of the impact. To ancient civilizations, such mysterious pieces of natural glass must have seemed almost magical, arriving without explanation from forces beyond ordinary experience. These naturally occurring examples may have inspired curiosity, but they did not immediately reveal how glass could be manufactured. That discovery most likely came through another material humanity had already learned to control: fire. As people gradually built better kilns and furnaces for making pottery and smelting metals, they unknowingly created temperatures high enough to produce entirely new materials. Potters working with clay, metal workers refining copper, and artisans experimenting with mineral-rich sands may all have played roles in glass, becoming one of history's greatest accidental discoveries. One popular story from ancient Rome credits Phoenician merchants with discovering glass while cooking beside a beach. According to the account written many centuries later by the Roman author Pliny the Elder, the merchants placed blocks of natron beneath their cooking pots to support them over the fire. As the intense heat continued burning, the natron supposedly mixed with the sand below, producing streams of clear liquid that cooled into glass. Whether this story actually happened remains uncertain, and most historians believe it is probably more legend than fact. Even so, it captures an important truth. Glass requires more than sand alone. It also depends upon additional ingredients that lower the melting temperature enough for ancient furnaces to produce workable molten glass. The most important ingredient in nearly every type of traditional glass is silica, the primary component of ordinary sand. Silica is an exceptionally stable material, which explains why sand remains unchanged despite centuries of wind, rain, and sunlight. On its own, however, pure silica melts at an astonishing temperature of more than 3,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Such extreme heat was difficult for ancient furnaces to achieve consistently. Fortunately, early craftsmen eventually discovered that adding substances such as natron, a naturally occurring mineral rich in sodium carbonate, dramatically reduced the melting temperature, making glass production far more practical. Another ingredient soon proved equally valuable. Limestone, rich in calcium compounds, strengthened the finished glass and made it less likely to dissolve or deteriorate over time. Without it, many early glass objects would have been fragile and unstable. Together, silica, soda, and lime became the foundation of glassmaking, forming what is still known today as soda-lime glass. Although modern manufacturing has introduced many refinements, the basic chemistry remains remarkably similar to what ancient glassmakers developed thousands of years ago. Inside the furnace, an extraordinary transformation begins. As temperatures climb higher and higher, the carefully measured mixture slowly loses its rigid structure. Individual grains no longer remain separate. Instead, they soften, merge together, and eventually become a glowing liquid unlike almost anything else found in nature. Molten glass behaves in fascinating ways. It pours like thick honey, stretches like warm caramel, and glows with brilliant shades of orange and yellow as heat radiates from its surface. Watching this transformation for the first time must have seemed almost miraculous. Ordinary sand had not disappeared. It had simply become something entirely new. Mastering molten glass was unlike mastering almost any other material. Stone could be carved slowly over weeks or even months. Wood could be cut, sanded, and reshaped if a mistake was made. Metal could often be reheated and forged again. Molten glass, however, demanded constant attention. It remained workable for only a limited time before gradually cooling and becoming too stiff to shape. Every movement had to be deliberate. Every tool had to be ready. Every craftsman needed to understand exactly how the glowing material would behave as its temperature slowly changed. Success depended not upon strength, but upon timing, patience, and experience. One of the first great challenges facing ancient glassmakers was producing glass that was both clear and free from unwanted impurities. Although ordinary sand contains large amounts of silica, it also contains countless tiny traces of other minerals. Even the smallest impurities could change the appearance of the finished glass. Iron, for example, naturally gives glass a pale green tint, which is why many old bottles and early window panes appear slightly green when viewed from the side. Ancient craftsmen quickly learned that the quality of the sand itself mattered enormously. Some river sands produced cleaner glass than others, while certain coastal deposits became highly prized because they contained fewer unwanted minerals. The ancient Egyptians and the people of Mesopotamia were among the first civilizations to transform glassmaking into a true craft. By around 3,500 years ago, workshops were producing small glass beads, decorative ornaments, colorful inlays, and elegant vessels for wealthy families and royal courts. Much of this early glass was opaque rather than transparent, glowing with brilliant blues, yellows, whites, and greens that resembled precious gemstones. Glass was so valuable that it was often treated almost like a luxury jewel, reserved for palaces, temples, and the homes of the wealthy, rather than for ordinary daily life. Creating these early objects required remarkable skill. One common technique involved shaping softened glass around a carefully prepared core made from clay and sand. The artisans slowly gathered molten glass onto the end of a metal rod before rolling and shaping it around the core, gradually building the walls of a small bottle or decorative container. Once the glass cooled, the clay core was carefully removed, leaving behind a hollow vessel. Although simple by modern standards, this process represented an extraordinary achievement at a time when almost every step depended entirely upon the steady hands and careful judgment of the craftsman. A revolutionary breakthrough arrived sometime during the 1st century before the birth of Christ with the invention of glass blowing. Historians generally credit skilled craftsmen living in the Eastern Mediterranean, likely within regions influenced by the ancient Phoenicians and later the Romans, with developing this remarkable technique. Instead of slowly shaping glass around a solid core, artisans discovered that they could gather molten glass onto the end of a long hollow metal tube, then gently blow into it, causing the glowing mass to expand like a bubble. With careful control, that bubble could be shaped into bottles, bowls, cups, and countless other forms much more quickly than ever before. Glass blowing transformed the industry almost overnight. Objects that had once required many hours of painstaking work could now be produced much more efficiently. The technique also allowed craftsmen to create thinner, lighter, and more graceful vessels than earlier methods had permitted. As the Roman Empire expanded across Europe, glass blowing spread with it, carrying both the knowledge and the skilled artisans who practiced the craft. Glass gradually became more affordable and more widely available, no longer limited exclusively to royalty and the wealthiest members of society. Inside a traditional glass workshop, the furnace quickly became the heart of everything. These remarkable structures burned continuously for days, weeks, and sometimes even months, because allowing the furnace to cool completely meant losing enormous amounts of time and fuel before production could begin again. Maintaining the correct temperature required constant attention. Too cool, and the glass became thick, stiff, and difficult to shape. Too hot, and it became excessively fluid, making precise work almost impossible. Experienced glass makers learned to judge the condition of the molten glass not only by its appearance, but also by the way it moved at the end of the blowpipe. Color provided another fascinating challenge. Naturally clear glass was beautiful in its own right, yet craftsmen soon realized that tiny additions of certain minerals could completely transform its appearance. Unlike paint, which sits upon the surface, these minerals became part of the glass itself, while everything remained molten inside the furnace. The color extended throughout the entire thickness of the glass, meaning it would never peel away, fade from sunlight, or wear off with age. Even after centuries of exposure to weather and changing temperatures, the color remained locked inside the material itself. Among the earliest and most treasured colors was a rich, deep blue created using cobalt. Only very small amounts were needed to produce an intense color that reminded many people of the evening sky or the open sea. Because cobalt was comparatively rare and difficult to obtain, blue glass often became one of the most valuable products a workshop could produce. Ancient rulers prized it, wealthy merchants traded it across great distances, and artisans used it to imitate precious stones such as lapis lazuli, which was itself one of the most sought-after minerals in the ancient world. As glassmakers continued experimenting, they gradually discovered an astonishing palette hidden within the natural world. Copper produced beautiful greens and turquoise shades. Manganese created delicate purples and violets. Iron, when carefully controlled, contributed soft greens and warm amber tones. Antimony helped create brilliant opaque whites, while combinations of different minerals produced an endless variety of subtle colors and effects. Every successful experiment expanded the possibilities available to future craftsmen, bringing the world one step closer to the breathtaking stained glass windows that would one day fill Europe's great cathedrals with glowing light. Yet producing colorful molten glass was only the beginning of the journey. Before magnificent windows could illuminate churches with thousands of radiant pieces, craftsmen first had to solve another equally difficult problem. They needed a reliable way to transform glowing rivers of molten glass into large, flat sheets, strong enough to become windows while preserving every brilliant color hidden within them. Long before modern factories could produce enormous sheets of perfectly flat glass, every window began as a glowing mass gathered from the furnace by hand. Creating flat glass proved far more difficult than blowing bottles or shaping bowls, because molten glass naturally wants to form rounded shapes. Gravity constantly pulled upon the glowing material, while surface tension encouraged it to become smooth and curved. Convincing that same molten glass to become a broad, even sheet required remarkable ingenuity, years of experimentation, and generations of patient craftsmen willing to refine their methods one improvement at a time. One of the earliest techniques involved creating a long glass cylinder. The glassblower first gathered molten glass onto the end of a blowpipe before carefully blowing and swinging it into an elongated shape rather than a rounded bubble. This delicate process demanded extraordinary control because the walls needed to remain nearly the same thickness from one end to the other. Once the cylinder had cooled slightly, craftsmen removed both ends, sliced it carefully along its length, and reheated it inside a special oven. As the glass softened once more, the cylinder slowly unfolded into a relatively flat sheet that could eventually become part of a window. Although ingenious, this method was far from perfect. Every sheet carried subtle ripples, tiny bubbles, and gentle distortions that reflected the handmade nature of its creation. Rather than considering these imperfections to be flaws, many modern historians and artists see them as part of the glass's unique character. As sunlight passes through these delicate waves, the light bends ever so slightly, giving historic stained glass windows a shimmering quality that perfectly smooth modern glass often cannot reproduce. The glass itself seems almost alive, gently changing as light moves across its uneven surface. Another fascinating technique became known as crown glass. Instead of stretching molten glass into a cylinder, the craftsman blew a hollow bubble before attaching it to a solid metal rod opposite the blowpipe. The glass was then reheated and spun at astonishing speed. Centrifugal force gradually pulled the softened glass outward until it formed a large, nearly flat circular disc, resembling an enormous transparent wheel. Watching this process required both skill and courage, as the glowing disc expanded rapidly while spinning only a short distance from the glassmaker. The finished sheets often measured several feet across, although the very center contained a thicker area where the supporting rod had been attached. That central section became known as the bullseye, a distinctive circular feature still admired by collectors today. Because the glass grew thicker near the middle, it created unusual visual effects as light passed through it. Although unsuitable for large picture windows, these central pieces were often incorporated into smaller decorative panels, where their unique appearance became a feature rather than a defect. Even today, reproductions of traditional bullseye glass remain popular among artisans seeking to recreate the appearance of historic buildings. Producing usable sheets was only part of the challenge. The finished glass also needed to cool at exactly the right pace. If the cooling happened too quickly, tremendous internal stresses developed inside the glass, even though nothing unusual could be seen from the outside. A seemingly perfect sheet might crack unexpectedly, days, weeks, or even months later. Ancient craftsmen may not have understood the molecular structure responsible for this behavior, but through experience they learned that patience during cooling proved just as important as skill during shaping. To solve this problem, glassmakers developed a process known as annealing. After shaping the glass, they placed it inside a carefully controlled oven called an annealing kiln, where the temperature was reduced very slowly over many hours and sometimes even days. This gradual cooling allowed the internal structure of the glass to relax naturally, greatly reducing hidden stresses that could later cause fractures. Annealing remains one of the most important stages of glassmaking today, because even the finest glass cannot reach its full strength without it. The science behind annealing is surprisingly elegant. As molten glass cools, billions of tiny particles gradually slow their movement and settle into a rigid structure. If one part cools much faster than another, different areas contract at different rates, creating invisible tension throughout the material. By slowing the cooling process, those internal forces become evenly distributed, producing glass that is stronger, more stable, and far less likely to break unexpectedly. It is remarkable that ancient craftsmen discovered the practical solution centuries before modern science explained why it worked. Once the sheets had cooled successfully, each one underwent careful inspection. Craftsmen lifted the glass toward the light, searching for cracks, stones, trapped ash, or other imperfections that might weaken the finished window. Tiny air bubbles were common, especially in hand-blown glass. Rather than rejecting every imperfect sheet, experienced artisans learned to work with these natural variations, placing each section where its individual qualities enhanced the final design. In many historic stained glass windows, these small bubbles continue sparkling in the sunlight hundreds of years later, quietly revealing that every piece was made entirely by hand. No two sheets emerging from the workshop were ever exactly alike. Slight differences in furnace temperature, mineral composition, blowing technique, and cooling conditions meant that each carried its own subtle personality. Some displayed gentle ripples that scattered light beautifully. Others contained faint streaks created as the molten glass flowed during shaping. Certain pieces appeared almost perfectly clear, while others possessed delicate textures that softened the light passing through them. These natural variations became one of the defining characteristics of traditional stained glass, giving every finished window a richness and depth that modern mass-produced glass often struggles to imitate. By now, the craftsmen had learned how to transform ordinary sand into beautifully colored sheets of glass. They had mastered the furnace, discovered the secrets of color, perfected methods for producing flat glass, and learned how to cool it without hidden fractures. Yet the most artistic stage of the journey still lay ahead. These glowing sheets were about to become the raw materials for something far greater than glass alone. With careful drawings, steady hands, and remarkable precision, master artisans would begin cutting each sheet into hundreds and sometimes thousands of individual pieces that would eventually come together to form some of the most breathtaking stained glass masterpieces the world has ever known. Long before a single piece of glass could be cut, painted, or joined together, every stained glass window first existed only as an idea. Whether the finished work would fill the wall of a small village church or rise more than 50 feet inside one of Europe's greatest cathedrals, the creative process always began with careful planning. Unlike a painting that could be adjusted as the artist worked, a stained glass window required hundreds or even thousands of individual pieces to fit together with extraordinary precision. One mistake made early in the design could affect every piece that followed, making thoughtful preparation one of the most important stages of the entire craft. The first sketches were often surprisingly simple. Artists explored different arrangements of people, architecture, flowers, geometric patterns, or symbolic designs using charcoal, ink, or colored pigments on parchment. At this stage, nothing was permanent. Figures could be moved, backgrounds adjusted, and decorative borders refined until the overall composition achieved the balance the artist desired. Medieval workshops frequently worked closely with church leaders, architects, and wealthy patrons who discussed the stories the windows would tell and the emotions they hoped visitors would experience as sunlight illuminated the finished glass. Once the general design had been approved, the artist created something known as a cartoon. Despite the modern meaning of that word, a cartoon in traditional stained glass had nothing to do with humorous drawings or animated characters. It was a full-size pattern, showing every line, every curve, and every individual piece of glass exactly as it would appear in the finished window. Some cartoons stretched across enormous work tables, covering entire rooms inside the workshop. Craftsmen often walked around them rather than trying to view the complete design from a single position. These full-size drawings served as the master blueprint for everyone involved in the project. Glass cutters followed the pattern while shaping each individual piece. Painters referred to it when adding facial features, folds in clothing, or decorative details. Lead workers relied upon the same lines when assembling the finished panel. Because so many craftsmen contributed to a single window, the cartoon ensured that every stage remained perfectly coordinated from beginning to end. Looking closely at one of these drawings reveals something fascinating. Every line represents more than the outline of a figure or a decorative pattern. It also marks the future location of a strip of lead. The artist therefore had to think like both an illustrator and an engineer. Every piece of glass needed to be large enough to remain strong, while also fitting naturally within the overall composition. Long, thin pieces were more likely to break. Extremely small fragments became difficult to assemble. Beautiful design and practical construction had to exist together from the very beginning. Color planning required equal care. Unlike paint, stained glass could not simply be mixed together on a palette after the window had been assembled. The artist needed to know exactly which sheet of colored glass would be used for every individual section before cutting even began. If the folds of a robe required deep blue, the correct blue glass had to be available. If leaves needed varying shades of green, or a sunrise demanded warm amber and ruby tones, those sheets had to be selected well in advance. A single large window might require dozens of different colors, each carefully chosen to work harmoniously with every neighboring piece. Light also became an essential part of the design process. Experienced stained glass artists did not create windows for electric lighting because electricity would not exist for many centuries. They designed every panel with natural sunlight in mind. A window facing east greeted the soft light of morning, while one facing west glowed most brilliantly during late afternoon. South-facing windows often received strong sunlight throughout much of the day, while northern windows experienced cooler, gentler illumination. These changing conditions influenced everything from color selection to the amount of painted detail placed upon the glass. Many medieval artists understood that some colors behaved very differently once installed high above the floor of a cathedral. A deep blue that appeared almost black inside the workshop might become brilliantly luminous when sunlight poured through it from behind. Rich ruby red could appear wonderfully vibrant in direct sunlight, yet seem much darker beneath heavy clouds. The artist therefore learned to imagine not only the finished window itself, but also how changing daylight would transform it throughout the seasons. In many ways, they were designing with tomorrow's sunlight as much as with today's materials. After the cartoon had been completed, individual templates were created for every single piece of glass. These patterns, often made from stiff parchment or heavy paper, were carefully cut along the exact outlines shown in the master drawing. Each template represented one future piece of glass. Every curve, every corner, and every angle had to be accurate, because even the smallest error could prevent neighboring pieces from fitting together correctly. Large cathedral windows sometimes required thousands of these individual templates, each carefully labeled before cutting began. The cutting tables soon became wonderfully organized places. Stacks of colorful glass rested nearby, while bundles of numbered templates waited patiently to be matched with the correct sheets. Craftsmen sorted pieces according to color, shape, and their position within the design. Looking across the workshop, the project resembled an enormous puzzle whose pieces had not yet been cut. There was a quiet sense of anticipation because everyone understood that the next stage would begin transforming drawings on paper into real glass for the very first time. Soon, the sound inside the workshop would change. The scratching of charcoal across parchment would gradually give way to the delicate sound of glass cutters scoring bright sheets of colored glass. Every careful movement would require confidence, patience, and remarkable precision, for unlike wood, which can often be trimmed a little more after each cut, glass allows very little opportunity for second chances. One clean score made at exactly the right place would determine whether a beautiful sheet remained intact or fractured beyond repair. Cutting stained glass is one of those crafts that appears almost effortless when performed by an experienced artisan, yet quickly reveals its difficulty the moment a beginner attempts it. Unlike cutting wood with a saw or trimming fabric with scissors, glass cannot simply be sliced apart. It must first be persuaded where to break. That subtle distinction has remained at the heart of glass cutting for centuries. Rather than forcing the material apart, the craftsman carefully creates a controlled weakness, allowing the glass to separate exactly where it is intended and nowhere else. The process begins by placing a template upon the chosen sheet of colored glass. Every curve and every angle is checked once more before the cutter ever touches the surface. Because handmade glass is rarely perfectly flat, experienced artisans often rotate the sheet beneath the light, studying its ripples, bubbles, and flowing textures. Sometimes these natural variations become part of the artwork itself. A ripple might suggest flowing water, while delicate streaks inside the glass could resemble drifting clouds or folds of fabric. Rather than fighting these characteristics, master craftsmen frequently incorporated them into the final design. For many centuries, glass cutters relied upon hardened iron tools to score the surface. Later, steel wheels became common because they produced cleaner, more consistent cuts. Today, many artisans use small cutting wheels tipped with industrial diamonds or tungsten carbide, materials hard enough to leave an extremely fine score across the surface. Despite these improvements, the basic principle has changed very little. The cutter does not slice through the glass. Instead, the tiny wheel creates a shallow line only a fraction of a millimeter deep. invisible from a distance yet strong enough to guide the break with remarkable precision. The sound made during scoring is one that experienced glass artists know immediately. It is not the harsh scraping many people expect. Instead, it is often described as a gentle hiss or a faint scratching sound, almost like a pencil moving across heavy paper. A smooth, consistent sound usually indicates that the pressure is correct. Too little pressure leaves an incomplete score that refuses to break cleanly. Too much pressure crushes the surface, increasing the chance that the crack will wander away from its intended path. One of the first lessons every apprentice learns is that a score should almost never be repeated. Once the wheel has passed across the glass, the decision has been made. Running the cutter over the same line again often damages the delicate fracture beneath the surface and greatly increases the risk of an uneven break. Confidence, therefore, becomes just as important as accuracy. The cutter studies the line, takes a steady breath, and completes the score in one smooth movement from beginning to end. Breaking the glass can feel almost magical. After scoring, the craftsman applies gentle pressure beneath the line, sometimes using specialized running pliers designed specifically for stained glass work. With remarkable precision, the crack follows the invisible path created by the score, separating the glass into two clean pieces. When everything goes well, the break happens with a quiet snap that experienced artisans find deeply satisfying. Yet even after years of practice, every break still commands respect, because glass occasionally reminds the craftsman that it possesses a mind of its own. Complex shapes require even greater skill. Gentle curves are often straightforward, but sharp inside corners and intricate patterns demand careful planning. Instead of attempting one impossible break, artisans frequently remove small sections one at a time, gradually approaching the final shape. Tiny notches disappear through a series of delicate cuts, each bringing the piece closer to the template resting nearby. It is a patient process that rewards careful thinking far more than speed. After the glass has been cut, the edges are rarely perfect. Small irregularities remain where the break occurred, and even tiny imperfections can prevent neighboring pieces from fitting together accurately. This is where grinding becomes essential. Using a water-cooled grinding wheel coated with industrial diamonds, the artisan gently refines each edge until it matches the template exactly. The flowing water serves two important purposes. It keeps the grinding surface cool, while also capturing fine glass particles that would otherwise become airborne. Grinding is often measured in fractions of a millimeter. Removing too much material creates gaps that become increasingly noticeable during assembly, while removing too little prevents adjoining pieces from fitting together properly. Throughout the process, each piece is returned repeatedly to the full-size cartoon, checked against neighboring pieces, and adjusted again if necessary. It is rather like assembling a giant puzzle before any of the pieces have actually been joined together. Gradually, hundreds of individually shaped fragments begin fitting so closely that only the thin channels reserved for the lead remain between them. By this stage, the workshop tables begin displaying something extraordinary. Scattered across the illuminated surface are hundreds of colorful pieces, each beautiful on its own, yet still incomplete. Deep sapphire blues lie beside glowing amber, emerald green rests next to brilliant ruby red, and delicate pieces no larger than a fingertip wait beside much larger sections destined to become flowing robes, architectural details, or broad areas of sky. Looking across the table, it is possible to glimpse the finished window long before a single piece has been permanently joined. Yet despite the growing beauty of the design, an important stage still remains. Most of these colorful fragments are little more than shapes. They have color, but not expression. Faces remain blank. Eyes have not yet been painted. Draped clothing lacks folds and shadows. Feathers, leaves, stone carvings, and delicate decorative details have yet to appear. To transform these colorful pieces into storytelling works of art, another remarkable skill is required. Using finely ground pigments, delicate brushes, and the intense heat of a kiln, stained glass artists will soon paint directly onto the glass itself, adding the details that give every window its life, depth, and unmistakable character. Although the brilliant colors of stained glass are created within the glass itself, much of the detail that gives a window its personality is added only after every piece has been carefully cut and shaped. Without this stage, human faces would remain featureless, flowing robes would appear flat, and buildings, flowers, trees, and animals would lack the depth that allows entire stories to unfold across the finished window. Color alone creates beauty, but painted details transform colored glass into narrative, allowing master craftsmen to communicate history, faith, symbolism, and emotion through light itself. Unlike traditional painting, stained glass artists did not cover large areas with thick layers of color. Doing so would block the very sunlight that gave the artwork its life. Instead, they worked with extraordinary restraint, applying only the smallest amounts of specially prepared glass paint where shadows, outlines, or fine details were needed. The goal was never to hide the glass beneath paint, but to work in partnership with it. Every brush stroke had to respect the light that would one day shine through the finished window. The paints themselves were unlike the paints used on canvas. They were made from finely ground glass mixed with iron oxides and other mineral pigments, combined with water or natural binding agents into a smooth paste. Because the paint contained powdered glass, it could permanently fuse with the surface during firing. Once heated inside the kiln, the tiny particles softened and bonded to the window, becoming part of the glass itself rather than simply resting upon the surface. The result was remarkably durable. Details painted hundreds of years ago can still be admired today, surviving rain, wind, changing temperatures, and centuries of sunlight. Painting often began with the bold outlines. Delicate brushes traced the edges of faces, hands, clothing, leaves, feathers, and architectural details. These dark lines gave each piece definition, once viewed from the floor of a cathedral many stories below. Without them, individual features would disappear into broad areas of color. Medieval artists understood that their windows would often be viewed from great distances, so every line had to remain clear enough to be understood, while still appearing graceful when seen up close. Once the outlines had dried, the artist gradually added shadows and texture. Rather than painting thick areas of darkness, they often spread a thin wash across part of the glass, before gently removing selected areas with small brushes, feathers, wooden sticks, or even the tips of their fingers. This subtractive technique allowed light to shine more strongly through certain sections while leaving other areas darker, creating the illusion of folds in fabric, curls of hair, feathers on wings, stone carvings, or the gentle contours of a human face. It required tremendous patience because every tiny adjustment influenced how sunlight would eventually pass through the finished panel. Perhaps the most delicate work involved painting eyes and facial expressions. A figure only a few inches tall might be viewed from the floor of a cathedral nearly 100 feet below, yet its expression still needed to feel calm, joyful, thoughtful, or solemn. Artists achieved this using remarkably simple lines placed with astonishing precision. A slight change in the angle of an eyebrow or the curve of a mouth could completely alter the feeling conveyed by the finished figure. Even today, restorers marvel at the confidence displayed by medieval craftsmen who painted these details without the benefit of modern magnifying equipment. One of the most remarkable discoveries in the history of stained glass came during the early Middle Ages with the development of silver stain. Despite its name, silver stain is not a surface coating like ordinary paint. Instead, compounds containing silver are applied to the glass before firing. As the window is heated, tiny silver particles migrate into the surface of the glass itself, permanently producing beautiful shades ranging from pale lemon yellow to rich golden amber. For the first time, artists could create multiple colors on a single piece of glass without cutting and joining separate sections together. Hair, crowns, halos, decorative borders, and sunlight itself suddenly became easier to portray with remarkable elegance. This discovery transformed stained glass design. Previously, adding yellow details often required inserting entirely separate pieces of colored glass, increasing both the complexity and the amount of lead within the window. Silver stain allowed delicate highlights to appear directly upon clear or lightly colored glass, making designs more refined while allowing greater amounts of light to pass through. Many of the golden details admired in medieval cathedral windows today owe their warm glow to this ingenious technique, which remains in use centuries after its discovery. After the painting had been completed, each piece entered the kiln once again. Firing demanded as much care as any earlier stage because excessive heat could distort the glass, while insufficient heat prevented the paint from bonding permanently with the surface. The kiln slowly climbed to the required temperature before cooling gradually once more. When the pieces emerged, the painted details had become an enduring part of the glass itself, capable of surviving for generations without fading or peeling away. As dozens, and eventually hundreds, of painted pieces returned to the work table, the design began revealing its full character for the first time. Faces looked back with gentle expressions. Robes flowed naturally across colorful garments. Leaves curled gracefully around flowers. Birds spread carefully detailed wings, and architectural backgrounds appeared with surprising depth, despite being created from little more than colored glass, painted shadows, and sunlight waiting patiently beyond the workshop walls. The individual fragments were no longer simply pieces of colored glass. They had become the building blocks of a much larger story. Only one great stage now remained. Every carefully painted fragment still rested separately upon the work table, waiting to become part of something larger than itself. To unite hundreds of colorful pieces into a single window, strong enough to withstand centuries of wind, weather, and changing seasons, craftsmen would turn to a material far softer than glass itself. Thin strips of lead, shaped with remarkable precision, would quietly bind every fragment together transforming countless individual pieces into one luminous masterpiece, ready to welcome the light. With every piece of glass now carefully cut, painted, and fired, the workshop reached one of its most satisfying stages. What had once been hundreds of separate fragments scattered across the work table was finally ready to become a complete window. Looking down from above, the colorful pieces resembled an enormous puzzle waiting for its final assembly. Each fragment had been measured countless times, its edges refined with patient care, and its painted details permanently fused within the kiln. Yet despite all of this work, none of the pieces could support themselves. Glass, although beautiful, is surprisingly fragile when standing alone. To transform these delicate fragments into a strong, unified work of art, craftsmen relied upon an unlikely material: lead. At first, lead may seem like an unusual choice. It is soft enough to scratch with a fingernail and far more flexible than iron or steel. Yet those very qualities made it almost perfect for stained glass. Unlike harder metals that resisted bending, lead could easily follow graceful curves, sharp corners, and delicate shapes without placing excessive pressure upon the surrounding glass. It acted almost like the branches of a tree, supporting every piece while allowing the entire window to move ever so slightly with changing temperatures and shifting weather throughout the centuries. The strips used for assembly became known as lead came. Each strip resembled the letter H when viewed from the end. Two narrow channels ran along either side of a central spine, allowing neighboring pieces of glass to slide gently into place. As more pieces were added, the growing network of lead slowly embraced every fragment, holding them together while following the exact lines established months earlier in the full-size cartoon. The lead itself became part of the artwork, creating the graceful dark lines that define every figure, flower, and geometric pattern within the finished window. Assembly usually began in one corner of the panel. The craftsman placed the first piece of glass against a sturdy wooden guide fixed to the edge of the work table. A strip of lead was fitted snugly around its edge before the next piece slid into the opposite channel. Another strip followed, then another, until the colorful fragments gradually spread across the table like an expanding mosaic. Every new piece depended upon the accuracy of all those that came before it. A mistake made early in the assembly could slowly grow larger as the panel expanded, so constant checking remained essential throughout the process. Watching an experienced lead worker assemble a stained glass panel is remarkably calming. There is no rushing and very little wasted movement. Each strip of lead is measured, trimmed, gently shaped, and pressed into position with quiet confidence. The colorful pieces settle neatly into their channels one after another, gradually revealing the complete design. Faces that had existed only as scattered fragments now align perfectly. Flowing robes reconnect across multiple pieces. Trees, flowers, buildings, and decorative borders slowly emerge from what only hours earlier had seemed like hundreds of unrelated shapes. Because lead is so soft, it can be shaped using surprisingly simple hand tools. Craftsmen gently bent each strip with their fingers or with small wooden blocks, guiding it around graceful curves without damaging the surrounding glass. Tight bends required particular care because stretching the lead too quickly could weaken it or create small distortions that affected the alignment of neighboring pieces. Like so many stages of stained glass, success depended less upon force than upon gentle, deliberate movements, repeated with remarkable consistency. Eventually, every intersection where two or more strips of lead met formed a small joint. These joints needed to become permanent before the panel could support its own weight. To accomplish this, craftsmen turned once again to heat, though on a much smaller scale than the roaring furnaces used to melt glass. Using heated soldering irons, they applied molten solder to every intersection, creating strong metallic bonds that locked the entire framework together. One by one, hundreds of tiny joints transformed the flexible network of lead into a unified structure capable of supporting the completed window. Solder itself has been used by metalworkers for thousands of years. Traditional stained glass workshops commonly used alloys made primarily from tin and lead because they melted at relatively low temperatures while creating durable, reliable joints. Before applying the solder, however, another important material had to be used. This substance, known as flux, cleaned the metal surfaces and prevented oxidation during heating. Without flux, the molten solder would refuse to flow smoothly across the lead, resulting in weak or uneven connections. Although rarely noticed by visitors admiring the finished window, flux quietly played an essential role in ensuring the strength of every panel. After the solder cooled, the window looked complete, yet another important step remained. Tiny gaps still existed between the glass and the lead came, allowing moisture and movement that could weaken the panel over time. To solve this problem, craftsmen brushed a special waterproof cement into every narrow space throughout the window. This dark mixture filled countless hidden openings while firmly locking the glass and led together into a much stronger structure. Once the cement had partially hardened, the excess was carefully cleaned away, leaving the visible surfaces neat, while the hidden strength remained locked inside. Many people are surprised to learn that the dark lines surrounding stained glass are not always naturally that color. Fresh lead has a soft gray appearance. To create the rich, aged finish associated with historic windows, many artisans apply a chemical treatment known as a patina. This process darkens the visible metal, producing deep charcoal or black tones that beautifully frame the glowing colors of the glass. The contrast is striking. Brilliant blues, radiant reds, glowing golds, and vivid greens suddenly appear even more luminous when bordered by the darker lead framework. The moment a completed stained glass panel is lifted toward the light is often described by artists as the true beginning of the artwork, rather than its conclusion. Inside the workshop, the colorful pieces appear beautiful, but subdued, their brilliance muted beneath the roof and surrounding walls. Then someone carefully carries the finished panel toward a window, or opens the workshop doors to the morning sun. Almost instantly, everything changes. The deep blues begin to glow from within, warm amber turns to liquid gold, rich ruby reds seem almost illuminated by fire, and soft greens take on the freshness of spring leaves. For the first time, the craftsman sees the window exactly as it was intended to be seen. The light has completed the masterpiece. This remarkable transformation explains why stained glass became so closely associated with churches and cathedrals throughout medieval Europe. Builders understood that enormous stone buildings, while magnificent, often felt dark and heavy inside. Thick walls and towering columns supported the massive roofs, leaving relatively few openings for ordinary windows. Stained glass offered an extraordinary solution. Instead of allowing sunlight to enter as plain white light, the windows transformed it into an ever-changing display of color that filled vast interiors with warmth, beauty, and movement throughout the day. Among the greatest achievements of medieval architecture were the Gothic cathedrals that began appearing across Europe during the 12th century. These remarkable buildings reached heights that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses carried much of the building's weight outward, rather than relying entirely upon thick walls for support. As a result, architects could create enormous window openings that would previously have been impossible. These soaring walls of glass became ideal canvases for stained glass artists, allowing entire stories to unfold across windows that sometimes stretch several stories above the cathedral floor. Perhaps no feature captures the imagination quite like the great rose windows. These enormous circular windows became one of the defining symbols of Gothic architecture. From a distance, they resembled giant flowers carved from light itself, their intricate patterns radiating outward from a brilliant central point. Looking closely reveals extraordinary geometric precision. Every section balances perfectly with the next, creating harmony through circles, petals, stars, and repeating shapes that seem almost impossible to construct from hundreds of individual pieces of glass. Even modern visitors often stand beneath these windows in quiet amazement, wondering how medieval craftsmen achieved such remarkable symmetry without the aid of computers or modern measuring equipment. The circular form of the rose window carried practical as well as symbolic importance. Structurally, the shape distributed weight evenly throughout the surrounding stone framework, allowing architects to create surprisingly large openings while maintaining the strength of the building. Artistically, the circle had long represented ideas of eternity, unity, and perfection because it has no beginning and no end. Whether visitors understood these meanings consciously or not, the graceful design naturally drew the eye upward toward the glowing center, creating an unforgettable impression as sunlight poured through the colorful glass. One of the world's most celebrated collections of stained glass can be found in the great Cathedral of Chartres in France. Remarkably, much of its medieval glass has survived for more than 8 centuries. Walking inside today is much like stepping into another age. The famous deep blue windows, often called Chartres blue, continue filling the vast interior with an almost dreamlike light that has inspired visitors since the early 13th century. Historians still study the precise composition of this extraordinary blue because its richness remains difficult to duplicate perfectly, even with modern techniques. Another breathtaking example appears inside Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, where the walls seem to disappear beneath towering stained glass windows reaching almost from floor to ceiling. Instead of feeling enclosed by stone, visitors often describe the experience as standing inside a jewel box made entirely of light. Thousands of individual pieces of glass depict scenes from history, their colors shifting constantly as the sun moves across the sky. During bright afternoons, the interior becomes almost completely surrounded by glowing reds, brilliant blues, emerald greens, and shimmering gold, creating an atmosphere unlike any ordinary building. The stories told through these windows were carefully planned. During the Middle Ages, Many people could not read written books, yet they could understand pictures immediately. Stained glass, therefore, became a powerful form of visual storytelling. Windows illustrated familiar events, important historical figures, everyday occupations, animals, plants, and symbolic images that helped communicate ideas to people of every age. Walking through a cathedral was rather like turning the pages of an enormous illuminated book made entirely from colored glass and sunlight. Not every panel depicted dramatic scenes. Many celebrated the natural world. Flowers filled decorative borders with graceful patterns. Grapevines wound their way around columns and arches. Birds perched among branches, while lions, deer, peacocks, lambs, and countless other animals appeared throughout the designs. Some represented virtues or ideas familiar to medieval audiences, while others simply reflected the beauty of creation itself. These natural details added richness and variety, reminding visitors that stained glass artists drew inspiration not only from architecture and history, but also from the forests, gardens, fields, and wildlife surrounding their own communities. As the hours passed, the windows quietly transformed once again. Morning sunlight entered from one direction, before gradually shifting across the building as afternoon approached. Colors that glowed brilliantly at sunrise softened beneath passing clouds, only to burst into life again moments later when the sun reappeared. During winter, lower sunlight entered at different angles than during summer, creating entirely new patterns across the floors. In this way, every stained glass window became a living artwork that never truly stood still. Long after the craftsmen had completed their work, nature continued collaborating with them each day, painting the cathedral with light in ways that could never be repeated exactly the same twice. For centuries, people have traveled great distances simply to stand beneath these remarkable windows. They come not only to admire the craftsmanship, but to experience something difficult to describe in words. It is the quiet realization that ordinary sand, transformed by fire, shaped by patient hands, and illuminated by sunlight, has become one of the most enduring expressions of human creativity. Yet as beautiful as these windows appear today, time itself never stops moving. Wind, rain, pollution, accidents, and the passing centuries slowly leave their mark, creating a new challenge for future generations determined to ensure that these masterpieces continue glowing for hundreds of years still to come. The greatest challenge facing stained glass is not creating it, but preserving it. Although glass itself can survive for astonishing lengths of time, the world surrounding it is constantly changing. Every sunrise warms the window, and every evening allows it to cool once again. Seasons bring expansion and contraction. Strong winds gently flex the lead framework. Rain, pollution, moisture, and even tiny vibrations slowly influence the materials year after year. These changes happen so gradually that no single day appears different from the last. Yet over the course of centuries, they quietly shape the future of every stained glass masterpiece. Perhaps surprisingly, the glass itself is often not the weakest part of the window. The lead came holding every piece together is much softer than the colorful glass it supports. Lead remains slightly flexible throughout its life, allowing the window to absorb small movements caused by changing temperatures and shifting buildings. This flexibility is one of its greatest strengths, but after hundreds of years, the metal slowly begins to fatigue. Gravity gently pulls downward on large panels, while repeated expansion and contraction gradually weaken joints that have endured millions of tiny movements since the day they were first assembled. Stone buildings also continue changing long after construction has finished. Foundations settle almost imperceptibly beneath enormous weight. Wooden roof beams expand and contract with humidity. Masonry responds to freezing winters and warm summers. None of these movements are dramatic, yet stained glass windows must quietly adapt to every one of them. A cathedral may appear completely still, but in reality, it is constantly responding to the natural world around it. The windows, resting within carefully carved stone openings, experience these subtle changes every day for centuries. Weather introduces another challenge. Powerful storms can drive rain against windows with surprising force, allowing moisture to find even the smallest weaknesses in aging lead or protective sealants. In colder climates, water that enters tiny cracks may freeze during winter, expanding as it turns to ice before melting again in warmer weather. This endless cycle places gentle but persistent stress upon both glass and stone. Over many generations, these repeated changes slowly widen existing weaknesses unless careful maintenance prevents more serious damage. Air pollution became an increasing concern during the Industrial Revolution. As factories spread across Europe and North America, smoke filled with sulfur compounds drifted into the atmosphere. Combined with rainwater, these pollutants produced weak acids, capable of slowly affecting both stone and glass. Although the damage often developed over many decades, conservators eventually discovered that historic windows exposed to heavily polluted cities sometimes weathered more rapidly than those in cleaner rural environments. Fortunately, improvements in air quality over recent decades have reduced many of these threats, helping preserve countless historic windows for the future. Accidents have always posed an unpredictable danger. A single falling branch during a violent storm, an unexpected fire, or even a stray object striking the glass can damage work that has survived for centuries. Throughout history, wars have proven especially destructive. Entire cathedrals suffered damage from explosions, artillery, and bombing campaigns, placing irreplaceable stained glass masterpieces at enormous risk. During the Second World War, many European museums, churches, and cathedrals removed their most valuable windows before bombing raids began. Thousands of carefully numbered pieces were packed into protective crates and stored in safer locations until peace returned. Thanks to this extraordinary effort, many priceless windows survived a conflict that destroyed countless historic buildings around them. When damage does occur, restoration becomes one of the most demanding specialties in the world of art conservation. Restorers rarely think of themselves as creating something new. Instead, they see themselves as caretakers, preserving the work of craftsmen who lived centuries before. Every decision must balance two important goals. The window should remain structurally sound, yet as much original material as possible should remain untouched. Finding that balance requires remarkable patience and deep respect for the history contained within every piece of glass. The first stage of restoration often involves careful documentation. Before removing a single panel, conservators photograph every section from multiple angles and create detailed drawings showing the exact location of each individual piece. Large windows may contain several thousand fragments of glass, so every component receives a unique identification number before disassembly begins. This careful record ensures that each piece can eventually return to precisely the same position it occupied before restoration started. Without such planning, reassembling the window would become almost impossible. Cleaning historic stained glass demands extraordinary care. Over hundreds of years, soot from candles, smoke, dust, and pollution gradually accumulate upon the surface, dulling the brilliant colors hidden beneath. It might seem tempting to clean the glass quickly, yet aggressive methods could permanently damage fragile painted details that have survived since medieval times. Conservators therefore use gentle techniques, soft brushes, purified water, and carefully selected cleaning solutions that remove unwanted deposits while preserving every original brush stroke left by the artist centuries earlier. Occasionally, a piece of glass has deteriorated beyond repair. Matching it is rarely straightforward. Modern glass often differs noticeably from historic handmade sheets because the texture, tiny bubbles, ripples, and even the chemistry may not be exactly the same. Skilled restorers therefore search for replacement glass that closely resembles the original in color, thickness, transparency, and surface character. Sometimes they commission specially made hand-blown glass using traditional methods so that the repaired section blends naturally with the surrounding centuries-old material. Once restoration has been completed, many historic windows receive an additional layer of protection. Rather than replacing the original glass, conservators often install a clear protective glazing on the outside of the building. This nearly invisible barrier shields the historic stained glass from rain, wind, pollution, and sudden impacts, while still allowing sunlight to pass through much as it always has. Visitors standing inside the cathedral rarely notice the extra protection, yet it quietly extends the life of priceless windows that have already survived for hundreds of years. Thanks to these careful efforts, countless stained glass masterpieces continue glowing today, much as they did when medieval craftsmen first lifted them toward the light. Every restored panel represents a partnership across the centuries. The original artist created the work. Generations of caretakers preserved it. Modern conservators protected it for the future. Together they ensure that ordinary grains of sand, transformed by fire and guided by remarkable craftsmanship, continue filling some of the world's most beautiful buildings with rivers of colored light for generations yet to come. Although stained glass is most closely associated with the soaring cathedrals of medieval Europe, its story extends far beyond church walls. As glass-making techniques improved over the centuries, artisans discovered that the same remarkable material could brighten palaces, universities, town halls, libraries, private homes, and eventually even railway stations and public buildings. While religious windows remained among the most ambitious works ever attempted, stained glass gradually became an art form embraced by many different cultures, each adding its own distinctive styles, subjects, and techniques to a tradition that had already endured for hundreds of years. One of the most fascinating aspects of stained glass is how strongly it reflects the period in which it was created. Medieval artists often filled their windows with richly colored scenes surrounded by intricate borders and symbolic patterns. Figures appeared elongated and graceful, their robes flowing elegantly across deep blue and crimson backgrounds. Every section of the composition served both artistic and practical purposes, balancing color, structure, and storytelling into a single harmonious design. These windows were created to be viewed from great distances, so bold outlines and vivid colors remained essential to their success. As Europe entered the Renaissance, artistic styles gradually evolved. Painters began exploring realism, perspective, and the careful study of light and shadow. These ideas naturally influenced stained glass artists as well. Faces became more expressive, clothing appeared more natural, and architectural backgrounds grew increasingly detailed. The windows still relied upon the same fundamental techniques of colored glass, lead came, and kiln-fired paint, yet the overall appearance reflected changing artistic tastes. Looking at stained glass from different centuries is rather like reading chapters from the history of art itself. The 17th and 18th centuries brought new challenges. Architectural fashions shifted, and many buildings favored larger areas of clear glass that allowed more daylight to enter. In some regions, stained glass became less common than it had been during the Great Gothic period. Fortunately, many historic windows survived these changing tastes, while dedicated workshops quietly continued preserving traditional skills. Their patience ensured that knowledge passed safely through a time when demand was often much lower than it had once been. Then, during the 19th century, stained glass experienced an extraordinary revival. Architects, artists, and historians developed a renewed appreciation for medieval craftsmanship, leading to the restoration of older cathedrals and the construction of new buildings inspired by Gothic architecture. Workshops once again filled with skilled glass cutters, painters, and lead workers eager to recreate techniques that had nearly faded from everyday use. This revival not only preserved ancient methods, but also encouraged fresh experimentation that expanded the possibilities of stained glass once more. One name became especially famous during this period. Louis Comfort Tiffany transformed stained glass in ways that remain influential today. Working in the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Tiffany became fascinated by the interaction of color, texture, and light. Rather than relying solely upon painted details, he developed and refined methods that emphasize the natural beauty already present within the glass itself. His workshops produced extraordinary lamps, windows, mosaics, and decorative panels, admired throughout the world for their rich colors and remarkable craftsmanship. Perhaps Tiffany's most significant contribution was his widespread use of copper foil construction. Instead of joining glass pieces with traditional lead came, each fragment was wrapped individually in a thin strip of copper foil before being soldered together. This technique allowed artists to create much finer lines, smaller pieces, and more intricate designs than had previously been practical. Delicate flower petals, graceful insect wings, flowing leaves, and highly detailed natural forms suddenly became easier to achieve, opening entirely new artistic possibilities while preserving the handcrafted nature of the work. Tiffany also experimented with extraordinary varieties of decorative glass. Some sheets shimmered with iridescent surfaces that changed color as the viewing angle shifted. Others contained swirling patterns that resembled flowing water, drifting clouds, or polished marble. Glass embedded with tiny bubbles or delicate streaks became desirable rather than something to avoid, because these natural textures scattered light in beautiful and unpredictable ways. Instead of treating every variation as an imperfection, Tiffany embraced the individuality of handmade glass, allowing the material itself to contribute to the finished design. His famous stained glass lamps soon became icons of decorative art. Domed shades assembled from hundreds of individually cut pieces glowed warmly from within, transforming ordinary household lighting into works of craftsmanship. Many featured dragonflies, wisteria blossoms, peacock feathers, autumn leaves, or flowering gardens, demonstrating that stained glass could celebrate nature just as beautifully inside a home as it had long done inside great cathedrals. More than a century later, original Tiffany lamps remain among the most admired examples of decorative glass ever created. Meanwhile, traditional stained glass continued evolving in Europe and throughout the rest of the world. Modern artists began exploring abstract patterns alongside historical subjects, using geometry, flowing lines, and bold color combinations to create entirely new visual experiences. Some designed windows for hospitals, schools, museums, airports, and public buildings, proving that stained glass belonged not only to the past, but also to the present. Although styles changed, the essential principles remained remarkably familiar. Glass still began as molten silica. Color still came from carefully selected minerals. Light still completed the artwork. Today, visitors can discover magnificent stained glass almost everywhere they travel. It glows inside centuries-old cathedrals, quiet country churches, museums, government buildings, universities, botanical gardens, and private collections. Some windows preserve stories painted hundreds of years ago, while others explore modern ideas through entirely contemporary designs. Yet despite these differences, they all share the same remarkable heritage. Every colorful fragment still traces its origins back to ordinary grains of sand transformed by fire, guided by skilled hands, and brought to life each day by the timeless partnership between glass and sunlight. As remarkable as stained glass has been throughout history, the craft has never stood completely still. Every generation of artists inherits centuries of accumulated knowledge, yet each generation also discovers new ways to shape light, color, and glass into something uniquely its own. The tools have become more precise, furnaces more carefully controlled, and scientific understanding far more advanced than medieval craftsmen could ever have imagined. Yet if one of those early masters were to step inside a modern stained glass studio today, much of what they saw would still feel wonderfully familiar. The heart of every workshop remains the furnace. Although modern kilns use carefully regulated electric heating rather than wood or charcoal fires, they still perform the same remarkable task of transforming rigid grains of silica into glowing rivers of molten glass. Today's furnaces allow temperatures to be measured within just a few degrees, giving artists much greater control over the finished product. Even so, experience continues to matter just as much as technology. Knowing exactly when glass is ready to shape remains something that no instrument can fully replace. Modern glassmakers also benefit from an extraordinary understanding of chemistry. Scientists now know precisely why cobalt produces such a rich blue, why chromium creates vivid greens, why selenium contributes brilliant reds, and how countless other elements interact with molten silica. Sophisticated laboratory equipment can analyze the composition of historic windows with astonishing accuracy, allowing manufacturers to reproduce colors that once seemed impossible to duplicate. Yet despite this scientific knowledge, many workshops still rely upon traditional recipes refined through generations of practical experience, because they continue producing beautiful results. One fascinating development has been the creation of specialty glasses designed for different artistic effects. Some sheets contain swirling streaks of color that resemble drifting clouds or flowing water. Others combine several shades within a single piece, allowing artists to create landscapes, flowers, or skies with fewer individual cuts. Certain glasses contain delicate textures that scatter sunlight into soft patterns, while others remain almost perfectly transparent to emphasize painted details. Rather than replacing traditional methods, these materials simply provide modern craftsmen with an even broader artistic palette. Advances in cutting technology have also expanded what is possible. Computer-guided machines and precision water jets are capable of producing shapes with astonishing accuracy. Laser measuring systems help create perfectly matched templates, while digital design software allows artists to experiment with countless arrangements before a single piece of glass is cut. These innovations save time during planning and improve consistency on especially complex projects. Yet remarkably, many master artisans still choose to cut glass by hand, believing that the subtle control offered by experienced fingers remains difficult for machines to equal. Painting has evolved as well, though its purpose remains largely unchanged. Modern glass paints offer improved durability and a wider range of effects, while carefully controlled kilns provide highly consistent firing temperatures. Artists can now layer colors with remarkable precision, creating subtle shadows and delicate textures that complement the natural beauty of the glass itself. Despite these improvements, the guiding principle remains exactly as it was centuries ago. The paint should never compete with the light. Instead, it should work alongside it, allowing sunlight to remain the true source of life within the finished window. Environmental awareness has also become an important part of modern glassmaking. Many workshops now recycle unused glass fragments rather than discarding them. Broken pieces may be melted into new sheets, transformed into decorative mosaics, or incorporated into future artistic projects. Some manufacturers have developed furnaces that consume less energy while maintaining the high temperatures necessary for production. Others carefully source raw materials to reduce environmental impact without compromising quality. These efforts reflect a growing appreciation that the craft depends not only upon human skill, but also upon the responsible use of natural resources. Education has played a vital role in keeping stained glass alive. Across Europe, North America, Asia, and many other parts of the world, specialized schools continue teaching traditional techniques to new generations of artists. Students learn how to score glass, grind precise edges, mix kiln-fired paints, shape lead came, solder delicate joints, and understand the chemistry behind every stage of the process. Many instructors encourage their students to practice the same patience that medieval apprentices once learned, reminding them that mastery comes through careful repetition rather than speed. Watching a modern apprentice at work is surprisingly similar to watching one from hundreds of years ago. The tools may be slightly different, the lighting brighter, and the workshop equipped with modern safety equipment, yet the rhythm remains unchanged. A sheet of colored glass rests upon the table. A template is carefully positioned. A glass cutter glides steadily across the surface with its familiar gentle hiss. The score is examined, the glass separates cleanly, and another small piece joins the growing design. The process is quiet, thoughtful, and deeply satisfying, linking today's artists directly with generations of craftsmen who practiced the same skills long before them. Many contemporary artists also enjoy combining traditional craftsmanship with modern architecture. New stained glass installations now appear in hospitals, airports, libraries, universities, museums, botanical gardens, and civic buildings where sunlight continues to transform ordinary spaces into places of warmth and reflection. Some designs remain richly detailed and representational, while others embrace flowing abstract forms that celebrate color and geometry without depicting specific figures. Whatever the artistic style, the essential goal remains beautifully consistent: to shape light itself into something that enriches the spaces where people gather. One of the most remarkable qualities of stained glass is that no two windows are ever truly identical. Even when artists follow the same full-size drawing, use the same colors, and work from the same design, each finished window develops its own unique character. Tiny variations within the handmade glass, subtle differences in painting, the direction of the sunlight, and the architecture surrounding the window all combine to create something that can never be perfectly duplicated. Just as every tree has its own grain and every fingerprint is unique, every stained glass window quietly develops its own personality. This individuality begins with the glass itself. Unlike modern mass-produced sheets that can appear almost perfectly uniform, traditional handmade glass contains countless subtle variations. Tiny air bubbles become trapped during the blowing process. Gentle ripples form as the molten glass cools. Slight differences in mineral composition create delicate shifts in color across a single sheet. These features were once considered imperfections by some manufacturers, yet today they are treasured because they remind us that every piece was created by human hands rather than an automated machine. As sunlight passes through these small variations, it bends and scatters in ways that give historic windows their unmistakable warmth and depth. Many visitors assume the brightest colors always draw the greatest attention, yet experienced stained glass artists know that balance is far more important than brilliance alone. A window filled entirely with intense reds, blues, and golds would quickly overwhelm the eye. Instead, artists carefully distribute color throughout the composition, allowing quiet areas of pale glass to rest beside richer tones. These gentler passages give the eye a place to pause before moving naturally toward the more vibrant sections. In many ways, creating a successful stained glass window is rather like composing music. Moments of great intensity become even more powerful when balanced by passages of calm. Light itself also behaves differently depending upon the season. During summer, when the sun travels higher across the sky, its rays enter many windows from steeper angles than they do during winter. The changing position of the earth throughout the year means the same cathedral can look subtly different from month to month without a single piece of glass ever being moved. Early morning light tends to feel cool and gentle, while the warm light of late afternoon enriches reds, ambers, and golds in remarkable ways. Medieval builders may not have understood astronomy in modern scientific terms, yet they observed these changing patterns with extraordinary care and often designed their buildings to take full advantage of them. Weather adds another ever-changing layer to the experience. Bright sunshine reveals every color with dazzling clarity, while an overcast sky softens the entire palette into quieter shades. During rainfall, the moving water outside the glass creates subtle distortions that make colors appear almost to shimmer. In winter, snow covering the ground reflects additional light upward into the windows, creating an effect quite different from the deep green landscapes of spring or the golden leaves of autumn. In this way, nature continues participating in the artwork every day, becoming an invisible partner to the craftsman who completed the window long ago. One fascinating aspect of stained glass is that it rarely reveals all of its beauty from a single viewpoint. Standing close to a window allows visitors to admire delicate painted details, tiny brush strokes, and subtle textures hidden within the glass itself. Stepping farther away changes the experience completely. Individual pieces begin disappearing into the larger composition, allowing faces, buildings, landscapes, and decorative patterns to emerge with remarkable clarity. Architects understood this relationship well, carefully placing windows where they could be appreciated from many different distances as people moved naturally through the building. Visitors often discover another surprise when they step outside. From within the building, stained glass glows because sunlight passes through it toward the viewer. Outside, however, the same window may appear darker and far more subdued because the light is traveling in the opposite direction. It is almost as though the artwork possesses two entirely different personalities, depending upon where it is viewed. This unique relationship between glass and light makes stained glass unlike paintings, sculptures, or tapestries, which generally appear much the same from any direction. Photographing stained glass presents its own challenges. Cameras often struggle to capture the full range of brightness visible to the human eye. A window that appears brilliantly balanced in person may lose detail in either the brightest highlights or the darkest shadows when photographed. Professional photographers sometimes return to the same cathedral several times throughout the day, waiting patiently for the exact angle of sunlight that best reveals the colors and painted details. Even then, they often acknowledge that no photograph completely captures the experience of standing beneath the real window as colored light quietly fills the surrounding space. For many people, the most memorable part of visiting a cathedral or historic building is not necessarily the architecture itself, but the feeling created when sunlight begins moving through the stained glass. There is a natural tendency to slow one's pace, lower one's voice, and simply watch the colors drift across ancient stone. The experience encourages quiet observation rather than hurried attention. Perhaps that explains why stained glass has remained meaningful for so many centuries. It gently reminds us to pause, look upward, and appreciate the extraordinary beauty that can emerge when science, craftsmanship, patience, and nature work together. As we continue our journey, we will discover that some of the world's most famous stained glass windows have survived against extraordinary odds. Fires, revolutions, wars, and the simple passage of time have threatened many of these masterpieces. Yet through remarkable acts of preservation, careful restoration, and the dedication of countless craftsmen, they continue welcoming the morning light just as they have for centuries, allowing new generations to experience one of humanity's most beautiful partnerships between fire, glass, and the sun. Among the thousands of stained glass windows created throughout history, a small number have achieved worldwide recognition, not simply because of their beauty, but because they represent some of the greatest accomplishments ever achieved in the craft. These windows have survived for centuries, witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, endured wars and revolutions, and continued welcoming each new sunrise with the same quiet brilliance that first amazed visitors hundreds of years ago. Each one tells its own story, not only through the scenes depicted in the glass, but through the remarkable journey of its survival. Perhaps no collection is more celebrated than the medieval windows of Chartres Cathedral in France. Built primarily during the early 13th century, the cathedral contains one of the largest and best preserved collections of original medieval stained glass anywhere in the world. More than 150 windows continue filling the vast interior with extraordinary shades of blue, crimson, emerald, and gold. Historians estimate that most of these windows have remained in place for more than 800 years, surviving periods of political unrest, changing fashions, and 2 world wars. Walking through the cathedral today allows visitors to experience much the same breathtaking display of light that medieval pilgrims admired centuries ago. Among these remarkable works, one color has become almost legendary. It is known simply as Chartres blue. Rich, deep, and intensely luminous, this particular shade has fascinated artists, historians, and scientists for generations. Although modern laboratories can analyze its chemical composition with impressive accuracy, reproducing its exact appearance remains surprisingly difficult. Part of its beauty comes not only from the cobalt used to create the color, but from the subtle variations within the handmade glass itself. Tiny bubbles, gentle ripples, and delicate differences in thickness allow the light to scatter in ways that give the blue an almost luminous depth, unlike anything produced by perfectly uniform modern glass. Another masterpiece of medieval craftsmanship can be found at Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. Completed during the 13th century, the chapel was designed almost as a magnificent display case for stained glass itself. The walls seem to dissolve beneath towering windows that rise nearly from floor to ceiling, leaving surprisingly little solid stone visible between them. More than 1,000 individual scenes unfold across the colorful panels, illustrating stories through an extraordinary combination of brilliant color, elegant composition, and intricate painted detail. When sunlight pours through these windows, visitors often describe the experience as standing inside a glowing jewel, rather than an ordinary building. England also possesses remarkable examples of stained glass craftsmanship. York Minster contains the famous Great East Window, one of the largest surviving medieval stained glass windows ever created. Completed during the early 15th century, it contains hundreds of individual panels depicting scenes filled with extraordinary detail. Even after more than 600 years, the window continues attracting historians, artists, conservators, and visitors eager to admire both its craftsmanship and its remarkable state of preservation. Extensive restoration carried out during recent decades has ensured that future generations will continue enjoying its beauty for many years to come. Germany offers another fascinating chapter in the history of stained glass. Cologne Cathedral, whose construction stretched across several centuries, contains windows representing many different artistic periods. Some preserve medieval traditions, while others demonstrate how the craft continued evolving into more modern styles. Walking through the cathedral is almost like traveling through time, observing how changing artistic ideas influence stained glass, while the essential techniques remained rooted in centuries-old craftsmanship. Not every famous stained glass window belongs to the Middle Ages. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Louis Comfort Tiffany introduced entirely new artistic possibilities that captivated audiences around the world. His windows often celebrated landscapes, flowering gardens, flowing water, and the beauty of the natural world, rather than relying primarily upon historical or religious subjects. By carefully selecting richly textured glass and minimizing painted details, Tiffany allowed the material itself to create much of the visual effect. His work demonstrated that stained glass could remain deeply traditional while also embracing fresh artistic ideas. Many of Tiffany's commissions found homes in libraries, museums, universities, churches, and elegant private residences throughout North America. His famous landscape windows appear almost painterly, despite being assembled entirely from individually cut pieces of colored glass. Looking closely reveals countless subtle variations in texture, transparency, and color that blend together with astonishing realism when viewed from a distance. These works continue inspiring modern stained glass artists more than a century after they were first created. Some of the world's most beautiful stained glass is found in places that receive relatively few visitors. Small village churches scattered across Europe often preserve windows crafted by local artisans hundreds of years ago. Though less famous than those found in great cathedrals, these quieter works possess a special charm of their own. They reflect the traditions, landscapes, occupations, and stories of the communities that commissioned them. In many cases, the same families who admired those windows centuries ago still live in the surrounding villages today, creating a remarkable connection between past and present. One of the most inspiring aspects of stained glass history is that these masterpieces continue serving the purpose for which they were originally created. They are not hidden away inside storage vaults or displayed only behind museum barriers. Instead, they remain where generations of craftsmen intended them to be, quietly welcoming each new day as sunlight passes through their colorful panels. Visitors experience them much as people did hundreds of years ago, standing beneath the same glowing light and sharing the same sense of wonder. It is difficult to think of many other works of art that have remained so closely connected to everyday life for such an extraordinary length of time. Paintings are often moved from one museum to another. Sculptures may be relocated, restored, or placed behind protective barriers. Stained glass, however, continues living within the buildings for which it was created. Every sunrise completes the artist's work once again, reminding us that although centuries have passed since the first craftsmen shaped ordinary sand into glowing windows, their masterpieces continue doing exactly what they were designed to do, filling the world with light, color, and quiet wonder. As beautiful as stained glass appears when viewed from a distance, one of its greatest achievements is something most visitors never notice. Every window is also an extraordinary feat of engineering. Behind the glowing colors and elegant artwork lies a carefully designed structure capable of supporting hundreds and sometimes thousands of individual pieces of glass while resisting gravity, changing temperatures, powerful winds, and the natural movement of buildings that have stood for centuries. Without this hidden engineering, even the most beautiful window would eventually collapse beneath its own weight. The lead framework provides flexibility, but larger windows require additional support. Medieval craftsmen solved this challenge using slender iron bars, known as saddle bars. These horizontal supports stretch across the window behind the glass, quietly carrying much of its weight without interfering with the artwork itself. Thin copper wires connect the lead framework to these bars at carefully planned intervals, allowing the window to remain secure while still expanding and contracting slightly as temperatures change throughout the year. Visitors standing inside a cathedral rarely notice these hidden supports, yet they are essential to the survival of many of the world's largest stained glass masterpieces. Designing these support systems required remarkable foresight. A small chapel window might weigh only a few dozen pounds, but the enormous windows found in great Gothic cathedrals can weigh hundreds or even thousands of pounds once the glass, lead, and supporting framework are assembled. Medieval builders understood that this weight had to be distributed carefully. Every section of the window worked together with the surrounding stone tracery, creating a partnership between architecture and stained glass, in which each depended upon the other for strength and stability. Stone tracery became one of the defining features of Gothic stained glass. Rather than creating one enormous sheet of glass, architects divided the opening into graceful patterns of carved stone. These elegant frameworks supported the weight of the building, while also providing natural divisions for the stained glass panels. Circles, pointed arches, quatrefoils, and flowing geometric forms became part of the artwork itself, allowing light and architecture to merge into a single harmonious design. Looking at a great cathedral window, it is sometimes difficult to tell where the architecture ends and the artwork begins. This close relationship between stone and glass meant that architects and stained glass artists worked together from the earliest stages of construction. The size and shape of every window opening influenced the artwork that would eventually fill it, while the planned artwork sometimes influenced the architectural details surrounding the opening. Rather than treating stained glass as decoration added after the building was finished, medieval builders considered it an essential part of the overall design. The cathedral was never truly complete until the windows had been installed. Transporting completed panels from the workshop to the construction site presented another impressive challenge. Glass is surprisingly strong when properly supported, yet individual panels remained vulnerable to twisting or sudden impacts during travel. Craftsmen carefully packed each section inside sturdy wooden frames before transporting them by wagon, river barge, or ship, depending upon the distance involved. Journeys could take days or even weeks, especially when large cathedrals commissioned windows from workshops located far away. Every mile increased the importance of careful packing and patient handling. Once the panels arrived, installation became a precise and often dangerous task. Large windows were frequently positioned high above the cathedral floor, requiring scaffolding that climbed deep into the building. Workers carefully raised each panel into place before securing it within the surrounding stone framework. Every section needed to align perfectly with its neighbors, so that the lead lines flowed continuously across the entire composition. A single panel placed incorrectly could disrupt the harmony of an enormous window stretching many stories above the ground. Many of these installations required years to complete. While one team of craftsmen assembled windows inside the workshop, Stonemasons continued carving architectural details, carpenters built scaffolding, and blacksmiths forged supporting hardware. The construction of a great cathedral resembled a carefully coordinated orchestra in which every craft depended upon the others. Stained glass artists were only one part of a much larger community of skilled workers, yet their contribution often became the feature visitors remembered most vividly centuries later. The scale of these projects remains astonishing even by modern standards. Some cathedral windows contain several thousand individually cut pieces of glass joined by hundreds of feet of lead cane. Every piece was cut by hand, painted by hand, assembled by hand, soldered by hand, and installed without the benefit of cranes, power tools, or modern lifting equipment. Looking upward today, it is difficult not to admire the determination, organization, and craftsmanship required to complete such ambitious works, using little more than simple tools, careful measurements, and generations of accumulated experience. Perhaps the greatest engineering achievement of stained glass is that so many of these windows continue performing exactly as their builders intended. They still support their own weight. They still withstand changing weather. They still allow sunlight to flood ancient interiors with extraordinary color. Most importantly, they continue reminding us that true craftsmanship is rarely the result of a single skill. It is born when science, engineering, mathematics, architecture, chemistry, and artistic imagination work together toward one shared goal. Standing beneath one of these magnificent windows today, it is easy to admire its beauty without realizing the remarkable structure hidden beneath the colors. Yet every glowing panel represents far more than artistic expression. It is the product of careful planning, precise engineering, and countless decisions made by craftsmen who understood that true beauty must also be built to endure. That combination of elegance and strength is one of the reasons stained glass has survived for centuries, continuing to transform ordinary sunlight into one of the most unforgettable experiences found anywhere in the world. By the time a stained glass window is finally installed, it has already completed an extraordinary journey. Ordinary grains of silica have been transformed by intense heat into molten glass. Carefully chosen minerals have given that glass its remarkable colors. Skilled artisans have blown, spun, or flattened glowing sheets before cutting them into hundreds of carefully shaped pieces. Artists have painted delicate details that will survive for centuries, while lead workers have assembled those fragments into a single unified composition. Yet perhaps the greatest transformation does not happen inside the workshop at all. It happens when the finished window begins interacting with the world outside, changing quietly with every sunrise, every passing season, and every year that follows. Unlike many forms of art that remain protected within climate-controlled museums, stained glass lives in constantly changing conditions. Morning sunlight enters from one angle, evening light from another. Summer days bring long hours of brilliant illumination, while winter offers lower, softer sunlight that reaches deeper into many buildings. Rain clouds drift across the sky, briefly muting the colors before allowing them to burst into brilliance once again. The window itself never moves, yet the experience of viewing it changes endlessly. It is one of the few works of art that continues collaborating with nature long after the artist has completed the final brush stroke. For this reason, many visitors return to the same cathedral more than once. They understand that seeing a stained glass window in the early morning offers a completely different experience from visiting at sunset. A clear summer afternoon produces colors unlike those seen during a quiet winter morning. Even the changing position of the sun throughout the year creates subtle differences in the way light travels across the building. Some windows glow most beautifully during the spring, while others reveal their greatest brilliance during autumn, when the angle of sunlight shifts once again. No photograph can fully capture this ever-changing relationship between glass and light, because every moment is unique. The surrounding architecture also plays an important role. Medieval builders carefully considered where each window would be placed within the building. A great rose window above the western entrance welcomed the warm light of late afternoon, while tall windows facing east greeted the first light of dawn. Smaller chapels often received gentler illumination that encouraged quiet reflection, while the largest windows flooded central spaces with vibrant color during important gatherings. The architecture was never simply a container for stained glass. It was carefully designed to work alongside it, allowing sunlight to become part of the building itself. Another fascinating aspect of stained glass is the way it influences the atmosphere of a space without people always realizing why. Scientific studies have shown that light affects human mood, concentration, and even our sense of comfort. Although medieval builders could not explain these effects through modern science, they clearly understood them through observation. They recognized that warm golden light created a different feeling from cool blue light, and that colorful spaces often inspired quiet admiration in ways plain stone walls could not. Long before psychology became a formal field of study, stained glass artists were already shaping emotional experiences through the careful use of color and light. This understanding helps explain why stained glass remains popular even in contemporary architecture. Modern hospitals sometimes include stained glass installations designed to introduce calming natural light into waiting areas. Universities commission windows celebrating knowledge, discovery, and learning. Libraries, museums, botanical gardens, and civic buildings continue embracing stained glass because it transforms ordinary daylight into something more memorable. Although the subjects portrayed have expanded far beyond medieval traditions, the fundamental goal remains unchanged: to enrich a space by allowing light itself to become part of the design. Many artists today also enjoy creating entirely abstract stained glass. Instead of depicting historical figures or detailed scenes, they explore flowing shapes, bold geometry, and carefully balanced color relationships. As sunlight passes through these modern compositions, viewers often discover different patterns and emotions depending upon where they stand. Some people notice movement, where others see stillness. Some focus upon individual colors, while others appreciate the overall harmony. In this way, stained glass continues inviting quiet contemplation, encouraging each visitor to experience the artwork in a personal way. Despite all the advances in technology, one remarkable fact remains unchanged. Every modern stained glass artist still depends upon the same essential ingredients that ancient craftsmen used thousands of years ago. Silica remains the foundation, fire still provides the transformation, minerals still create the colors, patient hands still shape the glass, sunlight still completes the masterpiece. The tools may have improved, scientific understanding has expanded enormously, and modern workshops benefit from technologies unimaginable to medieval artisans. Yet the heart of the craft remains wonderfully familiar. Perhaps this continuity explains why stained glass feels timeless. Standing beneath a magnificent window today creates a connection not only with the artist who designed it, but also with every generation of craftsmen who helped preserve the knowledge required to create it. From the earliest experiments with molten silica in ancient civilizations to the glowing cathedrals of medieval Europe and the modern studios that continue the tradition today, each generation has added another chapter without losing sight of the remarkable discovery that started it all. It is extraordinary to think that one of humanity's most beautiful artistic traditions began with simple curiosity. Someone wondered what might happen if sand became hot enough to melt. Others experimented with minerals, discovered new colors, improved furnaces, refined techniques, and patiently passed their knowledge forward through countless generations. Every stained glass masterpiece standing today represents not only artistic talent, but thousands of years of shared human curiosity, careful observation, and the quiet determination to transform something ordinary into something unforgettable. As our journey begins moving gently toward its conclusion, we have traveled from grains of sand resting beneath our feet to glowing windows admired throughout the world. We have watched chemistry become color, fire become craftsmanship, and sunlight become the final artist. Only one final chapter remains, where we will step back and appreciate what stained glass has quietly given humanity for more than 1,000 years, and why these luminous masterpieces continue inspiring wonder every time the morning light begins to shine through them. Throughout history, every civilization has left behind objects that help tell its story. Some built towering pyramids, others raised magnificent temples, carved mountains into cities, or constructed bridges that still stand today. Yet stained glass occupies a rather unique place among humanity's greatest achievements, because it is one of the very few art forms that depends equally upon nature and human skill. Without sunlight, even the finest stained glass window remains quiet and subdued. Without the patience of generations of craftsmen, sunlight alone could never create the breathtaking displays of color that have inspired people for centuries. Together, they form a partnership unlike anything else in the history of art. Perhaps that is why stained glass has survived changing fashions for so many generations. Architectural styles have risen and fallen. Building materials have changed dramatically. Entire civilizations have disappeared, while others have transformed beyond recognition. Yet people continue pausing beneath stained glass windows for exactly the same reason they did hundreds of years ago. They are captivated by the simple but extraordinary transformation taking place before their eyes. Ordinary white sunlight enters one side of the glass and emerges as brilliant rivers of blue, crimson, emerald, violet, and gold. The process feels almost magical, even though modern science now explains it through the behavior of light and the chemistry of minerals. What makes this transformation even more remarkable is that the colors are not created by the sunlight itself. The sunlight already contains every visible color within it. The stained glass simply reveals what was there all along. Different minerals within the glass absorb certain wavelengths of light, while allowing others to pass through. Cobalt allows beautiful blue light to continue its journey, while blocking many other colors. Copper encourages greens to emerge. Gold produces rich ruby reds, through the formation of microscopic particles suspended within the glass. Every glowing window is quietly demonstrating the science of light, even if the people admiring it never think about physics at all. This relationship between science and beauty has fascinated scholars for generations. Physicists admire stained glass because it reveals the behavior of light. Chemists study the remarkable reactions that create different colors inside molten silica. Historians trace the movement of ideas, trade routes, and craftsmanship across continents. Architects examine the engineering that allows enormous windows to remain standing for centuries. Artists appreciate composition, color, and storytelling. Very few human creations invite so many different fields of knowledge to meet within a single work of art. Even the smallest stained glass panel reflects this remarkable partnership. Every piece of colored glass represents decisions made long before it reached the workshop. Someone selected the sand. Someone refined the minerals. Someone prepared the furnace. Another craftsman gathered the molten glass, shaped it, cooled it, and preserved it until an artist finally chose it for a particular design. The cutter shaped it. The painter added detail. The lead worker assembled it. The installer secured it within the building. Conservators then protected it for future generations. Hundreds of individual acts of skill quietly combine inside every finished window, even though visitors usually experience it as a single effortless masterpiece. There is also something deeply reassuring about the patience required by the craft. Nothing meaningful happens quickly. The tree used to fuel ancient furnaces needed years to grow. Sand formed over immense stretches of geological time. The furnace required hours to reach the correct temperature. Molten glass demanded careful shaping before it cooled. Paint needed firing. Lead required careful assembly. Even after installation, the window often looked different throughout the day, as sunlight slowly revealed its full beauty. Every stage rewarded patience rather than haste, reminding us that some of the world's finest creations emerge gradually, one careful step at a time. Today, millions of people continue visiting cathedrals, museums, churches, universities, and historic buildings, not simply because they wish to see stained glass, but because they wish to experience it. They understand that photographs capture only a small part of the story. The true beauty appears when light begins passing through the glass, illuminating colors that seem almost impossible to describe. Standing quietly beneath a great window remains one of those rare experiences that connects people across centuries. The same sunlight that fills the glass today once illuminated those very same colors for builders, artists, travelers, and visitors hundreds of years ago. As we reflect upon the remarkable journey of stained glass, it becomes clear that this story has never been only about glass. It is a story about curiosity, about people who refused to accept that sand was merely sand. It is about generations of craftsmen who patiently improved their techniques, solved difficult problems, and passed their knowledge to those who followed. It is about artists who discovered that light itself could become part of their work. Most of all, it is a story of transformation, where one of the most common materials on Earth became one of humanity's most enduring expressions of beauty. Tomorrow morning, somewhere in the world, sunlight will once again stream through a stained glass window that has already witnessed hundreds of years of history. Its colors will quietly spread across ancient stone, just as they did centuries ago. Visitors will pause, perhaps without fully understanding the chemistry, the engineering, or the craftsmanship before them. Yet they will feel exactly what generations before them have felt. A quiet sense of wonder that something as ordinary as sand, guided by fire, patience, and remarkable human imagination, could become something so extraordinary. So as evening gently settles and the last rays of sunlight slowly fade beyond the horizon, imagine those magnificent windows resting peacefully in cathedrals, churches, museums, and workshops around the world. Their colors grow softer as daylight disappears, patiently waiting for another dawn when they will once again transform ordinary sunlight into rivers of blue, crimson, emerald, violet, and gold. It is a tradition that has endured for centuries, and one that continues to remind us that some of the greatest masterpieces ever created begin not with something rare or precious, but with a simple handful of sand and the timeless human desire to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the remarkable history, science, and craftsmanship of stained glass. I hope you enjoyed discovering how ordinary grains of sand became glowing works of art that have illuminated the world for more than 1,000 years. Until our next journey together, sleep well and have a peaceful night.